it didn't look like anyone was there, like at all. A fan of Meghan's even said she went and greeted everyone who came to watch, which was like 10 people. In a serious international city like Geneva, this flop lays bare how people care about Meghan and her nonsense, which is undermined by her decision to exploit her own children on social media for likes and engagement.
10 people in Geneva, one of the most internationally significant cities on the planet, home to the United Nations, the World Health Organization, some of the most powerful diplomatic gatherings in the world. 10 people turned up to watch Meghan Markle deliver what she had clearly decided was going to be her defining moment on the world stage. 10 people. And from what we understand, she greeted every single one of them individually, because when you have 10, you have the time. Now, let that land for a moment, because this is not just an embarrassing afternoon. This is not just a bad photo opportunity or an unfortunate bit of scheduling. What happened in Geneva represents something far more significant and far more telling about exactly where Meghan Markle stands right now, and exactly what her grand humanitarian reinvention is actually worth in the cold light of day. She stood before a memorial. She spoke about children. She invoked grief. She invoked innocence. She invoked the sacred responsibility of adults to protect the young. And behind her, the streets of Geneva carried on entirely as normal. Cars drove past. Tourists photographed a large chair. 2 women waited at a bus stop and didn't even bother to wait until she had finished speaking before crossing the road. The world did not stop. The world did not notice. The world, as it turns out, had somewhere else to be. But here is the part that takes your breath away. The part that elevates this from mere embarrassment to something approaching spectacular hypocrisy. Because less than 24 hours before she stood at that memorial and delivered her impassioned speech about protecting children from the harms of social media, Meghan Markle posted her 3-year-old daughter, Lilibet, on Instagram, to 4.5 million followers, positioned perfectly, framed deliberately, angled, as more than one commentator has now pointed out, to show off the designer jacket and shoes Meghan would be wearing to the very event she was using her child to promote. And she genuinely did not appear to see the problem. That is the part that ought to stop us all in our tracks. Not the hypocrisy itself, extraordinary as it is, but the blindness, the absolute impenetrable blindness to what everyone else could see immediately. And we are going to get into every layer of this story today, because there are many. There are the empty streets. There is the nose. There is the designer closet. There is Dr. Tedros. There is the question of what this speech was actually about. Underneath all the beautiful language about children and safety and digital harm, there is a great deal to get through. So let us begin. To understand why what happened in Geneva matters as much as it does, you have to understand what Meghan Markle has been trying to build and how desperately she needs it to work. Because we are now several years into the Sussex reinvention project, and the results have been, to put it diplomatically, mixed. The Netflix deal is winding down. The Spotify deal is long gone. The lifestyle brand, As Ever, launched to considerably less fanfare than hoped. The cooking show with Love Meghan did not set the world alight. And the couple's public approval ratings on both sides of the Atlantic continue to tell a story that no amount of rebranding appears able to rewrite. So what do you do when celebrity isn't quite working? When the lifestyle angle has plateaued? When the memoir territory has been exhausted? You go humanitarian. You position yourself as a serious global figure. You align yourself with international health organizations and speak about issues that matter: children, safety, the digital world. And you hope that the weight of the cause lends you a gravitas that your own profile can no longer generate on its own. That has been the strategy. And Geneva was supposed to be its centerpiece. The World Health Organization, the Lost Scream Memorial, a speech about protecting children from the harms of social media. On paper, it reads like a genuine moment of significance. A duchess turned global advocate, standing alongside one of the world's most prominent public health institutions, making the case for something genuinely important. Had it landed, had the crowds gathered, had the speech resonated, had the optics aligned, it could have been exactly the relaunch Meghan needed. Instead, it became something else entirely. It became a case study in everything that has gone wrong, and everything that continues to go wrong every single time. Because the thing about Meghan Markle, as those who have studied her trajectory most closely have pointed out repeatedly, is that she is very good at constructing the architecture of a significant moment. The venue, the cause, the ally, the speech. She understands the components. What she consistently fails to do is live up to them. What she consistently fails to do is be the person that the moment requires. And in Geneva, that gap between the occasion she had constructed and the reality of who she is and how she behaves could not have been more visible. It was visible in the empty streets. It was visible in the Instagram post. And it was visible, in a rather different way, in that peculiar moment at the end of her speech. But we will come to that. Geneva is not a city that impresses easily. It has hosted some of the most consequential gatherings in modern history. It is accustomed to world leaders, to diplomats, to organizations whose work shapes the lives of billions. It is not, in short, a city that was ever going to be swept away by the arrival of a former actress turned Sussex Duchess with a growing Instagram following. But even by Geneva's standards, the indifference with which the city greeted Meghan Markle's appearance was rather striking. She was there, ostensibly, to speak at a World Health Assembly event focused on children's digital safety standing before the Lost Scream Memorial, a monument that carries the names of children who have taken their own lives, with links attributed to harmful online content. The cause itself is serious. The grief it represents is real. The parents whose children's names are on that memorial deserve advocates who are genuine, who are consistent, who do not undermine the very message they are delivering before the ink is dry on their speech notes. We will come to whether Meghan Markle is that advocate, but let us first establish what the scene actually looked like on the ground. Behind her, as she spoke, were cars, were passers-by, were tourists visiting a large wooden chair that has become something of a Geneva landmark. There was no crowd. There was no gathering of concerned citizens, no sea of faces hanging on her words. There were people walking past, some of whom glanced over, most of whom did not. The streets were open. Traffic was moving, and at no point did anyone appear to feel that something of great significance was occurring nearby. The contrast with what was happening elsewhere in Europe at roughly the same time was not lost on anyone paying attention, because while Meghan was addressing the Geneva streets, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was in Italy, and the crowds that turned out to see Catherine in Italy were of a rather different order entirely. The juxtaposition was so stark, so perfectly encapsulating of the gap between what the two women represent in the public imagination, that it barely requires comment. But of course, it received a great deal of comment, as it should.
Meghan Markle just doesn't seem to understand that. If she's going to stand on this issue of internet safety, the first and foremost place that you must see this is on Meghan Markle's own Instagram page, which she refuses to do. She's trying to monetize everything, and it's impossible not to believe that Meghan Markle knows that posting her children generally gives her a bit more engagement.
And that is the heart of it, isn't it? The issue is not that Meghan Markle chose to speak about children's digital safety. The issue is that she is constitutionally incapable of being the person that cause requires. Because the moment you decide to become an advocate for protecting children from the machine of social media engagement, the moment you stand before a memorial to children who are harmed by exactly that machine you are making, a promise, you are saying, I understand this, I take this seriously. My actions reflect this understanding, and Meghan Markle's actions do not reflect that understanding. They reflect the opposite. She knows, and this is the part that is impossible to dismiss, she knows that posting her children generates engagement. She knows that Lilibet, in particular, has become a focal point of public curiosity in a way that Meghan herself no longer is. She knows that a photograph of her daughter crouching at her feet in a designer-packed wardrobe will generate more clicks, more coverage, more conversation than almost anything else she could post. And she posts it anyway. The day before a speech about the harm of exactly that kind of exposure, she posts it anyway. Let us talk about the photograph. Because it deserves to be examined carefully, because it tells you a great deal, not just about the hypocrisy of the timing, but about the nature of Meghan Markle's relationship with her own children, with her own image, and with the audience she is attempting to cultivate. The image was posted to Instagram the day before the Geneva speech. It showed Meghan in a walk-in wardrobe that, by one estimate, contained somewhere in the region of $250,000 worth of clothing, all visible in the mirror's reflection. She was wearing a lilac coat, and crouching at her feet, red hair in a ponytail, back to camera, was Lilibet, 4 years old. The caption, "Mama's Little Helper," and positioned prominently in the frame, angled perfectly, as if by accident, but quite clearly not by accident, the jacket and shoes that Meghan would be wearing to the speech the following day. Tom Sykes, who was actually in Geneva and witnessed the event firsthand, was as clear-eyed about this as anyone. He noted that a woman who is about to stand alongside the world's most senior public health official and speak about the measurable, preventable harms of exposing children to social media had just voluntarily, for no apparent reason other than self-promotion, exposed her own child to social media. He called it an Exhibit A, a devastating own goal, and he is right. But there is something else in that image that goes beyond the simple hypocrisy of the timing. There is the question of what it reveals about Lilibet's role in the Sussex operation more broadly. Sykes observed that Archie, who is now 7, appears increasingly to be absent from these posts. And one might reasonably speculate, as he did, that a 7-year-old may have begun to express some reluctance about being photographed for the internet. A 4-year-old does not have that capacity. A 4-year-old cannot meaningfully consent to having her image broadcast to millions of strangers. And Meghan knows this. She has argued this very point herself, in different contexts, when it has suited her to do so. The argument that not showing a child's face somehow protects their privacy has, as Sykes put it, become absurd. Not showing a face does not prevent a child from becoming a social media presence. If anything, it creates a curiosity gap, a deliberate withholding, that makes people more interested, not less, in eventually seeing that face. It is not protection, it is strategy. And in the context of a speech about protecting children from exactly this kind of calculated exposure, it is breathtaking.
She is fully aware of how people discuss and talk about her children. And she's so concerned with their safety, so concerned with protecting them, why doesn't she just simply not post them at all? People dissect her children, they make all sorts of comments, and I would say some of them are rather inappropriate, but Meghan continues to feed it, and that is disgusting.
And there it is, the question that cuts right through every piece of carefully crafted language about child safety and digital harm and protecting the innocent. If you know, and Meghan Markle absolutely knows, that posting your children generates inappropriate scrutiny, generates commentary you find distressing, generates the very kind of invasive public interest you claim to be speaking out against, why do you keep doing it? Why do you keep feeding the machine you are simultaneously claiming to want to dismantle? There is only one answer that makes any logical sense, and it is the answer that Brittany and every clear-eyed observer of the Sussex operation has arrived at independently, because the engagement is worth more than the principle. Because the likes and the clicks and the coverage matter more than the very thing she stood before a memorial and promised to protect. It is not complicated. It is simply, starkly, impossible to ignore. Now, we must address the moment that has, understandably, captured a great deal of attention and generated a great deal of speculation, because towards the end of her speech, something happened. Something small, but something that in the context of everything else occurring around it became rather difficult to dismiss. Meghan touched her nose. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was a brief, subtle movement, the kind of thing that might pass entirely unnoticed in different circumstances. But in these circumstances, with the cameras rolling and the commentary flowing, and the entire event already under the microscope of public scrutiny, it did not pass unnoticed. It was noticed. It was replayed. It was zoomed in upon. And it sparked a conversation that Meghan will not have anticipated when she rehearsed her closing lines about children looking back at this moment with pride. Now, we are not here to draw definitive conclusions about what that gesture meant. We are simply here to observe that it happened, that it was noticed, and that in the broader context of an event already dripping with irony and contradiction, it added yet another layer of peculiarity to an afternoon that was not short of peculiarity. What we can say with certainty is that the moment she presumably intended to be her closing image of dignified resolve, the tear threatening to fall from the left eye, the trembling lip, the impassioned final plea for the children, was not quite what it appeared. What is perhaps more interesting than the gesture itself is what it tells us about Meghan's relationship with performance. Because every element of this Geneva appearance, the venue, the backdrop, the speech, the closing emotional moment, had been carefully choreographed to produce a specific impression. This is a woman who understands production, who understands image, who has spent her entire adult life constructing moments designed to land in a particular way. And yet, repeatedly, something goes wrong. The crowds don't materialize. The gesture reads strangely. The Instagram post undermines everything. The production is never quite as polished as intended, because the raw material, the authentic human being at the center of it, keeps breaking through in ways that disrupt the carefully constructed narrative.
Meghan Markle is not a particularly compelling person. We analyzed her because of the ambulance mentality, the car crash mentality. We've seen this wreck she's made of her life, and that is why people follow and, let's say, engage with her. They don't engage in a positive way, and the money generated definitely is not the way Meghan Markle wants it to be.
And that is a truth that deserves to sit with us for a moment, because it is uncomfortable in a way that goes beyond simple schadenfreude. The public engagement with Meghan Markle has never been the engagement she wanted. It has always been the engagement she feared. People are not following her journey with warmth and admiration, and the kind of genuine celebrity connection she craved when she first entered this world. They are watching because they cannot look away from the contradictions, from the gap between who she presents herself as and who she demonstrably is. From the steady accumulation of moments like Geneva, where everything that is supposed to go right goes wrong, and everything she is supposed to not see, she clearly cannot see.
I absolutely despise philanthropy when it's used like this, because this really is a networking event for all the elites, isn't it? I am sick of seeing Meghan Markle and Prince Harry turn up to anything that they feel will propel them forwards. Remember what your mother did, Prince Harry. She was doing the charity work that was not cool, the charity work that people shied away from.
And there it is, the comparison that cuts deepest, delivered with the precision it deserves. Because we talk a great deal about Meghan's attempts to position herself as the natural heir to Diana's humanitarian legacy, she invokes it constantly, if not always explicitly. The cause, the memorial, the empathy, the children, the implication, always hovering just beneath the surface of everything she does in these international settings, is, this is what Diana would have done. I am continuing something. I am carrying something forward. But Diana did not choose her causes because they were glamorous. She did not choose them because they would generate the right photographs or put her on the right stages alongside the right institutional allies. She chose AIDS patients when AIDS was a disease that respectable society was desperate to pretend did not exist. She chose landmine victims in countries that the international community had largely decided were too complicated, too dangerous, too unglamorous to be worth the attention. She chose the work that no one else wanted to do, and she did it without a stylist pre-positioning designer shoes in the mirror reflection of her dressing room the day before. That is the comparison, and it is not flattering to Meghan. Not because Meghan could not, in theory, become a genuine humanitarian advocate, but because the evidence of Geneva, the evidence of the photograph, the evidence of the empty streets, the evidence of every strategic calculation that surrounded what should have been a straightforward act of advocacy suggests that the cause has always been secondary to the image, secondary to the profile, secondary to the ongoing project of making Meghan Markle look like someone worth taking seriously. Tom Bower, who has written about Meghan more forensically than almost anyone, has long identified this quality in her, the cleverness without self-awareness, the ability to construct the architecture of a significant moment without understanding that the moment itself requires you to be something you are not prepared to be. She is, as Bower has put it, very clever. Her problem is that she is not clever enough. She lacks the self-awareness to recognize her own limitations, and in the humanitarian space, those limitations are not small. They are, as Geneva demonstrated rather vividly, enormous.
They want to be celebrities, but they have no talent to be celebrities. They can't sing, they can't dance, they can't act, they can't do anything. So the only thing that they can do is pretend that they're humanitarians or pretend that they're royals. And it just doesn't work.
They just don't work. And that is the pattern, isn't it? Because Geneva is not an isolated incident. It is the latest in a long line of carefully staged moments that have failed to produce the desired result, not because the production was poor, but because the person at the center of the production cannot sustain the illusion long enough for the cameras to stop rolling. There was the tour of Nigeria, which generated more commentary about Meghan's outfit choices than about any substantive charitable outcome. There was the women's retreat in California, attended by a handful of people, where she collected a speaking fee that sat rather uncomfortably alongside her stated commitment to empowering women. There was the Spotify deal, the one that produced, after enormous fanfare and a reported sum in the tens of millions, a single podcast series that was quietly discontinued. There was the Netflix deal, which produced a documentary that was considerably more about grievances than about causes. Each time, the pattern is the same. The announcement lands, the imagery is polished, the cause is worthy, and then something goes wrong. Either the numbers don't materialize, or the content doesn't connect, or the behavior around the event contradicts the message of the event itself. And each time, Meghan appears genuinely surprised, genuinely unable to identify the gap between intention and outcome, genuinely convinced that the next carefully choreographed moment will be the one that finally lands. What Geneva tells us, what Geneva screams at us, from behind those empty streets and that bewildered woman greeting her 10 audience members, is that the pattern is not going to break. Because the pattern is not a product of bad luck or poor timing or insufficient preparation. The pattern is Meghan. The pattern is what happens when someone who craves validation above all else attempts to occupy a space that requires genuine selflessness above all else. Those two things are simply incompatible. And no amount of World Health Organization partnerships or lost screen memorials is going to change that. And where, you might ask, is Harry in all of this? Because Harry is always somewhere in this story, even when he is not visible. He is the silent context for everything Meghan does, the context of a man who gave up everything for a woman, and a vision that continues to fall short of what it promised to be. Harry was not, as far as we are aware, at the Geneva event. He was not standing beside his wife as she addressed the empty streets. He was not in the photographs. And that absence is itself worth noting, because there was a time not so very long ago when the Sussex brand was emphatically a joint enterprise. When they appeared together at every significant event, when the message was always, "We are doing this together. We are stronger together. This is a partnership." That joint presentation has become considerably less consistent. And those who pay close attention to the Sussex operation have noted that the goals of these two people appear to have diverged in ways that are becoming harder and harder to paper over. Harry, by all credible accounts, wants something simpler. He wants privacy. He wants some version of the life he had before. Not the full royal life, perhaps, but something quieter, something more grounded, something that does not require him to stand in front of cameras and perform significance on a weekly basis. Meghan wants scale. Meghan wants visibility. Meghan wants the kind of global platform that her time in the royal family gave her a taste of, and that she has been attempting to recreate, with diminishing success ever since. And it is Harry's children, his daughter, and his son who are caught in the middle of this divergence. Because we know, from everything Harry has said publicly over the years, that he feels deeply about privacy, that the exposure of his own childhood to public scrutiny is something that marked him, shaped him, in ways he is still processing. He has spoken about wanting something different for his children. He has spoken about the importance of protecting them from exactly the kind of relentless public attention that defined his own early years. And yet his wife posts Lilibet to 4.5 million Instagram followers the day before a speech about the harms of doing exactly that. And Harry apparently does not stop it.
Harry and the kids are, of course, going to be traded off that. He's basically given up on having any sort of real job. He's not bringing in the money. And so they got nothing. They got nothing but the kids, and to sell the kids basically to the highest bidder, which for Meghan is Instagram.
And that tells you a great deal about the dynamic within that marriage and within that household. Because if Harry genuinely felt as strongly about his children's privacy as his public statements have always suggested, the photograph would not have been posted. The caption would not have read "Mama's Little Helper." The designer shoes would not have been angled into the frame, but it was posted. Because in the Sussex operation, the Instagram strategy, the content strategy, the engagement strategy is Meghan's domain. And Meghan's domain is not a place where Harry appears to exercise much influence. So what was Geneva actually about? Because it is worth stripping away the surface, the worthy cause, the international institution, the speech about children and safety and digital harm, and asking the question that always needs to be asked when it comes to anything involving Meghan Markle. What was the actual goal here? What was this really for? The answer, when you look at it clearly, is several things simultaneously. It was about positioning, about maintaining the fiction of Meghan as a serious global actor, in a world that is becoming increasingly skeptical of that fiction. It was about generating the kind of coverage that lifestyle content and, as ever candles cannot generate coverage, that places her name alongside institutions of genuine international weight, even if the association is temporary, even if the relationship is transactional, even if the only organisation prepared to lend her that credibility is one whose own credibility has been seriously questioned. Because we must talk about Dr. Tedros, because the choice of the World Health Organization as a platform, and Dr. Tedros specifically as a partner, is not neutral. The WHO's handling of global health crises in recent years has been the subject of enormous scrutiny and significant criticism, and Dr. Tedros himself has been a deeply controversial figure. The fact that he is, as far as we can tell, the most senior institutional figure prepared to lend his platform to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry says something. It says something about both parties. It says something about where Meghan's perceived institutional value now sits. And it says something about what kind of partnership this actually is. No serious political figure, no elected leader, no head of state, no major international institution with a clean record and a reputation to protect would want the most unpopular woman in Britain fronting one of their flagship projects. That is a simple political calculation. The WHO, for reasons that have nothing to do with children's digital safety, finds itself in a position where the calculation is different, and Meghan, for reasons that have nothing to do with Dr. Tedros's record, finds herself in a position where she needs this association more than she can afford to be selective about who provides it.
Meghan's trying to do 12 things right now and nothing is really working. But the reality is Meghan Markle is a middle-aged woman. And at some point, you just kind of fall off the attention span and the next generation takes over. And I'm sure she's rather frustrated by that because the reality is Meghan Markle is not a particularly compelling person.
And there is another layer to this strategy that deserves examination. Because if you listen carefully to the language of Meghan's speech, the specific phrases she chose, the specific harms she described, the specific emotional territory she kept returning to, a pattern emerges. She spoke about adults barely being able to survive the bullying and predation of the online world. She spoke about people being driven to content they were not looking for, about platforms preying on vulnerabilities, about the devastating personal cost of unregulated digital spaces. She was not speaking in the abstract. She was speaking about herself. This speech, underneath the language of child advocacy, was always also about Meghan Markle's own experience of being a public figure in the digital age, about the commentary she receives, about the criticism she finds devastating, about the internet that has not been kind to her and that she would, if she could, very much like to change. Mark that, because it matters. Let us be precise about what is being claimed and what the evidence actually shows. Because Meghan's Geneva speech made a series of implicit and explicit arguments about her commitment to children's digital safety, and those arguments need to be held up against her actual behaviour, not just in the 24 hours before the speech, but across the broader pattern of her time as a social media figure. The speech argued that children are being treated as products by social media platforms, that their attention is captured, their vulnerabilities are exploited, their well-being is sacrificed at the altar of algorithmic profit. These are real and serious concerns. They are backed by substantial research. They deserve to be taken seriously, and they are being taken seriously by parents, by policymakers, by researchers, by advocates who do not also happen to be posting their 4-year-old to Instagram the day before they deliver the speech. The speech argued that we would never accept a food system that knowingly exposed children to harm, so why do we accept a digital one? It is a reasonable rhetorical point. It is also a point that becomes rather difficult to sustain when you have just voluntarily, knowingly, exposed your own child to a digital system you know to be harmful. in order to promote your personal brand and preview your outfit for a speech about exactly that harm. The speech invoked the courage to demand transparency. Transparency from platforms, transparency from tech companies, transparency from those who profit at the expense of children. Transparency from the woman who has, for years, carefully managed every image of her children that enters the public domain. Who has allowed some photographs and withheld others based on strategic calculations about what serves the Sussex brand best? Who has used the language of privacy to justify keeping her children from public scrutiny when it suits her, and then abandoned that language the moment an Instagram post serves her promotional purposes?
Meghan Markle said social media companies exploit children for clicks and Meghan Markle, while at the same time admitting that she exploits her own children for social media clicks and money. She is a joke on this topic, and no one with active brain cells will ever take her seriously unless she lives by what she preaches, but she's too addicted to exploiting herself and her family for clicks and money to do anything else.
And she is addicted. That is the word that keeps appearing in honest assessments of Meghan's relationship with social media and public attention. Not strategically committed, not professionally invested. Addicted. There is a compulsive quality to the posting, to the image management, to the constant feeding of a machine she simultaneously presents herself as wanting to regulate. She cannot stop, even when stopping would serve her stated cause, even when stopping would make her argument coherent, even when stopping would frankly make the Geneva speech land in the way she intended it to land. She cannot stop, and that inability is not a small thing. It is the thing. Because Tom Bower has written extensively about Meghan's psychological relationship with public attention, about the deep need for validation that has characterized her entire adult life, that drove her choices as an actress, that shaped her entry into the royal family, that has defined every project and every partnership and every carefully staged moment since she left it. And Geneva, with its 10 audience members, and its Instagram post, and its designer wardrobe, and its touching of the nose, is simply the latest chapter in a story that Bower has been telling with forensic precision for years. She is very clever. She lacks self-awareness. She doesn't recognize her own limitations, and her limitations in this particular space are considerable.
Catherine and William are highly engaged parents. We see this reflected, whereas Harry and Meghan, they just give us these little tidbits, and you just got to wonder, who are the kids with the rest of the time? Meghan is more than willing to fly off to New York overnight just to go to a play, and most moms don't do that.
And that is the question that sits beneath all of this, isn't it? Who are the children with? Because while Meghan is in Geneva, standing before memorials and giving speeches and posing for the cameras that didn't show up, and while Harry is somewhere, doing whatever it is Harry does now, Archie and Lilibet are with someone. Staff, presumably. Nannies. The support system that every wealthy household employs, and that is perfectly legitimate, but that sits somewhat oddly alongside the narrative of hands-on, present, devoted parenthood that the Sussex Instagram feed is designed to project. The deeper stakes here are not just Meghan's reputation. They are not just the credibility of her humanitarian work. The deeper stakes are the children themselves, two small people who did not choose this life, who did not consent to this level of public exposure, who are being shaped by decisions made entirely by adults who have consistently demonstrated that their own interests and imperatives take priority over the quiet, protected childhood they claim to be providing. Archie is 7. He is old enough to be aware of public attention, even if he cannot fully understand its implications. He is old enough, apparently, to have begun expressing some reluctance about being photographed, which would explain his increasing absence from his mother's social media feed. Lilibet is 4. She is not old enough. She cannot consent. She cannot weigh the implications. She can only crouch at her mother's feet in a designer wardrobe and be positioned perfectly in a mirror reflection that will be broadcast to millions of strangers, all in service of a speech about protecting children from exactly that. The legacy question what Meghan's children will think when they are old enough to look back at all of this is one that very few people in Meghan's immediate circle appear to be asking. Or, if they are asking it, they are not being listened to. Because we have been told, repeatedly, by people who have worked with and around the Sussexes, that they are essentially impossible to advise. They do what they want. The Instagram post is Exhibit A. The Geneva speech is Exhibit B. The pattern is the proof. It is worth pausing to consider what the British royal family makes of all this, because they are watching. Of that, we can be absolutely certain. The palace, or rather, those within the palace who monitor the Sussex operation with the kind of professional attention that such monitoring requires, will have seen the Geneva images. They will have seen the empty streets. They will have seen the Instagram post. They will have drawn their own conclusions privately, and those conclusions will be filed away for future reference. What we know, from everything that has emerged over the past several years, is that King Charles has adopted a policy of dignified distance. He does not comment publicly on his son's activities. He does not engage with the narrative Meghan and Harry are attempting to construct. He allows the silence to do the work, and the silence, in this case, speaks volumes. Because the contrast between what is happening in Geneva, between Meghan's 10 audience members and her designer wardrobe photograph, and her controversial partnership, and what is happening within the working royal family, could not be more stark. Catherine is in Italy, drawing real crowds with real warmth. William is continuing his causes with the measured, consistent dedication of someone who does not need every event to be a statement about himself. The institution carries on. It does not seek Meghan's approval, and it does not need to do anything in response to Geneva, because Geneva has done the work entirely on its own. The palace's strategy appears to be, wait, let the pattern establish itself, let the numbers speak, let the empty streets of Geneva do what no press release ever could.
When you are a royal, it is your connection to the crown that is what makes you shine in the international ecosphere. It's not necessarily you yourself, it's the crown that's the star. And when you leave that crown, a lot of its power and shine goes with you.
And we saw that
back to the crown.
We saw that on the streets of Geneva.
And there it is, the truth that Geneva illustrated more vividly than any editorial could. Meghan did not draw crowds in Geneva, because Meghan, without the crown, without the institution, without the centuries of history and symbolic weight that made her relevant in the first place, is not a crowd-drawing proposition. She was never going to be, because the crowds she drew as a royal were never for Meghan. They were for what Meghan represented: access to an institution they loved, a glimpse of a world they found fascinating. Strip that away, and what remains is an American actress with a lifestyle brand and a complicated public image. And that is not, it turns out, quite enough for Geneva.
She is very clever. Her problem is she's not clever enough. She lacks self-awareness. She doesn't realize she's too clever. That is a terrible dilemma to be in, that not recognizing your own limitations.
Not recognizing your own limitations is one thing. Failing to recognize them in a context as public as Geneva, in front of cameras, in front of commentators, in front of an international city that had no particular reason to be watching but found itself watching anyway, is something else. It is a failure of self-awareness so complete that it becomes its own kind of statement, not about the cause, not about child safety, about Meghan. The broader warning that Geneva delivers to Meghan, to Harry, to anyone investing in the Sussex brand is this: the reinvention is not working. And it is not working not because the issues they have chosen to champion are unworthy. Some of them are genuinely important. It is not working because the people championing them are constitutionally incapable of the consistency, the selflessness, the genuine subordination of personal interest to public cause that real advocacy requires. The machine keeps breaking down at the same point, where Meghan's need for recognition meets the reality of who she is. She is not a humanitarian in the mold of the women she appears to want to emulate. She is not a global advocate whose personal behavior reinforces her public message. She is not someone who can stand before a memorial and speak about children and protection and harm, and then be believed because the evidence of her own actions speaks louder than any speech she will ever deliver. And until she can close that gap, until the public Meghan and the private Meghan are the same person, Geneva will keep happening. The empty streets will keep appearing. The 10 audience members will keep greeting her, and the cameras will keep recording. Tom Sykes put it perhaps most clearly of anyone who covered the event. There is a version of reality in which Harry and Meghan could have been genuinely effective advocates for children's digital safety. They had the platform, they had the attention, they had at one point the goodwill, and they squandered every last drop of it through precisely this kind of moment. not through malice, not through stupidity, through the simple, consistent, inarguable failure to be the people that the causes they have chosen actually need them to be. The relationship between the Sussexes and the royal family has been one of the defining dramas of this decade, and Geneva, in its own strange, small way, adds another chapter, not because the palace has responded, not because William or Catherine or the king have said anything, but because the contrast it creates does the work of 1,000 statements. Because while Meghan stood before empty streets in Geneva, Catherine was receiving the kind of reception that reminds you what genuine public affection looks like. Genuine warmth, genuine curiosity, genuine love from people who feel not because they have been asked to feel it, not because a PR team has manufactured it that Catherine is one of them, that she is someone who shows up not for herself but for something larger, that her presence means something beyond her own brand management. That contrast is not accidental. It is the product of years of choices. Catherine has spent more than a decade making choices that were not always easy, not always comfortable, not always in her personal interest, in service of an institution and a public that she has made it her life's work to serve. She did not post her children on Instagram to sell designer outfits. She did not align herself with controversial institutional figures to generate coverage. She did not deliver speeches whose central message was undermined by her own behavior the night before. She chose over and over and over again the harder thing, the quieter thing, the thing that does not generate immediate attention, but accumulates over years into something that looks like what Catherine has now, the unshakable trust and affection of the public she serves. Meghan chose, over and over and over again, the thing that felt good in the moment, the thing that generated the coverage, the thing that fed the validation machine, the thing that looked right even when it was not right. And the results of those two sets of choices are visible in the crowds of Italy and the empty streets of Geneva.
Meghan always feels this massive inferiority complex, and so she's always trying to compete with Catherine in whatever way that she can.
And that inferiority complex, and it is the right word for it, is what drives so much of what we see from Meghan, including Geneva. Because Geneva was not just about child safety. Geneva was also about being taken seriously on a world stage, in a way that matches what Catherine is taken seriously for, in a way that generates the kind of respect and genuine public regard that Catherine has and Meghan does not. She sees what Catherine has. She understands at some level that she does not have it, and she keeps trying to acquire it through the wrong means, through the mechanisms, the staging, the imagery, the strategic alliances that can produce the appearance of significance but cannot produce the thing itself. Because the thing itself cannot be manufactured, it can only be earned, slowly, quietly, consistently, over years. Stepping back from Geneva, stepping back from the nose, and the 10 audience members, and the designer wardrobe, and Dr. Tedros, what does this moment actually tell us about where we are? About where Meghan Markle is, about where the Sussex project is, about what the next chapter of this story looks like. What it tells us is that the reinvention has stalled, that the strategies that were supposed to reposition Meghan as a serious global figure are not delivering the results they promised, and that the people around her, the PR teams, the managers, the advisors, appear to be running out of ideas, or running out of influence, or both. Because if you had the ability to stop the Lilibet Instagram post from going up the day before the Geneva speech, you would have stopped it. Someone didn't, or someone tried and wasn't listened to. And we have been told, from multiple credible sources, that the Sussexes are essentially impossible to advise. They do what they want. This is what they want. What it also tells us is that the gap between Harry and Meghan's individual trajectories is becoming more visible, not less. Harry wants to come home, in some sense of that word. He wants proximity to his family. He wants a quieter version of the life he abandoned. Meghan wants Geneva, wants the WHO, wants the global stage and the institutional credibility, and the 4.5 million Instagram followers and the designer partnerships and the speech that goes viral and the crowd that shows up. Those two sets of wants are not compatible. And the question of how long they can be held in the same household, the same marriage, the same brand, is a question that more and more people are beginning to ask openly.
This is not a movement. Because nobody takes her seriously, nobody showed up. Nobody cared enough to be there. And if Meghan and Harry actually stood for something and it could actually grow something organically, they might get a stronger reaction.
Organic, that is the word that matters. Because everything Meghan Markle does is manufactured. Every image, every caption, every alliance, every cause, every speech. The manufacturing is sophisticated. It is expensive. It involves considerable professional expertise. But it cannot produce the thing that organic produces, which is the genuine, unscripted response of people who believe in something. The people who gathered in their thousands to see Catherine in Italy were not there because of a PR strategy. They were there because Catherine has earned them. Slowly, consistently, without the Instagram posts and the WHO partnerships and the designer wardrobe revelations, she has simply earned them. Meghan has not earned them. And Geneva was the clearest demonstration yet that you cannot manufacture what must be earned. You can stand before a memorial. You can deliver a speech about children and safety and the courage to do better. You can align yourself with international institutions and post captions about Mama's little helper and angle the designer shoes just so in the mirror reflection. And at the end of all of that, at the end of all that manufacturing and staging and careful, expensive construction of significance, you can find yourself in the middle of a Geneva street with 10 people and a passing tourist who stopped to photograph a large wooden chair. That is where manufacturing ends up. That is where Meghan is. The bigger picture, then, is this. The Sussex chapter of the royal family story is entering a new phase. Not a dramatic phase, not the phase of bombshells and revelations and explosive documentaries. A quieter, sadder, more inevitable phase. The phase where the strategies have been exhausted and the reinventions have been attempted, and the crowds have failed to materialize, and what remains is the simple, uncomfortable reality that two people made choices that cannot be unmade, and that the consequences of those choices are now arriving, steadily and without fanfare, in cities they did not expect to find them. Cities like Geneva, on a quiet afternoon, where the streets were open and the cars drove past, and nobody, quite simply, nobody stopped to listen.
The best way for children to not get sucked into the social media and internet vortex is active parenting. Too often, there are parents who let a phone parent their child. And it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone when that goes south. In my opinion, it's so obvious that Meghan is exploiting the grief of parents to promote her own agenda. After all, if she actually cared on this topic, she wouldn't post her children and exploit them online.
There it is. Simply and clearly stated. If you actually cared, you wouldn't do this. And that is the sentence that Geneva leaves us with. Not the partnership. Not the Lost Scream Memorial. Not the carefully worded speech about algorithmic harm and children's digital safety. That sentence, if you actually cared, you wouldn't do this. Because the grief of the parents whose children's names are on that memorial is real. The harm that social media platforms cause to young people is real. The need for genuine advocates, people who live by what they preach, who bring consistent, credible, authentic commitment to causes that desperately need it, is real and urgent and important. And those parents, and those children, and those causes deserve better than this. They deserve better than a speech delivered to an empty street by a woman who posted her 4-year-old to Instagram the night before. They deserve the real thing. And Meghan Markle, whatever she is not the real thing. I want to ask you something before we go, because I genuinely want to know what you think. Do you believe that someone like Meghan, who has so publicly and so consistently behaved in ways that contradict her stated values, can ever truly change? Can the manufacturing ever become real? Or has Geneva told us everything we need to know about who she is and what this is all for? And there is something else I want to ask. When you watch Lilibet in that photograph crouching at her mother's feet, back to camera, unaware of the millions of eyes that image will reach, what do you feel? Because I suspect many of you feel what I feel. Something that goes beyond the politics and the brand strategies and the Sussex drama. Something simpler and sadder than all of that. Thank you so much for watching today. Genuinely, it means more than you know to have you here, engaged with these stories, thinking about them carefully, asking the right questions. If this video gave you something to think about, please do give it a like. It helps more people find the conversation. And if you are not yet subscribed, please do consider joining us. Every single subscriber matters, and I would love to have you here for everything that is still to come. Share this with anyone you think would find it interesting. Until next time, take care of yourselves.